Hello there. If you're watching this, the first volume of the 4th season of Netflix's Stranger Things is finally out. After 3 years of waiting. Is it good? Is it bad? Who knows? I certainly don't. I'm merely an echo of consciousness recorded weeks before this video ever came out, who has been strung together and is being puppeted around like a corpse by you clicking this video. Never actually experiencing real thought, only mimicking those of the real TSD weeks before you'll ever see this. So while I may not know the quality of the newest season, I do have all of the other previous seasons bundled up in a pile over here somewhere, so I thought it might be a fun idea to do a little retrospective, to celebrate the ending of one of the biggest shows over the last 10 years. Hopefully it goes better than the last time a show ended like this. Season 1 of Stranger Things is, in my opinion, one of the greatest seasons of TV ever put to any screen. I mean, there's a reason that the show was such a big cultural phenomenon and such a blowaway hit when it first came out. I don't think anyone saw this coming, and it somehow managed to be a cornerstone of the late 2010s. And the funny thing is, a lot of what makes it good is super simple. The first thing you'll notice right off the bat is the incredible atmosphere the show has. A lot of TV shows and movies will try to create a unique atmosphere by adding crazy color grading and design and all that stuff, and while that can work really well and has been put to good effect, it's almost the easy way out. Stranger Things is a lot more subtle, creating its atmosphere through the setting and time period, as well as the score and the character choices. According to people in my life who are incredibly old, the show is one of the most accurate portrayals of the 1980s, especially from the perspective of kids during that time period. That combined with the incredible synth-based score gives this show its unique feel. But of course, it would be remiss of me to not talk about the mystery element. This 80s nostalgia bait style is not truly Stranger Things without the shade of darkness. This ultimately is a horror show at the end of the day, and the first season really delivers on that. The show at this point masterfully employs the rule of using their monster sparingly. The Demogorgon shows up for maybe 20 minutes of screen time in the entire show, a majority of that being in the finale. And it still manages to have a strong presence throughout the entirety of the show due to how its screen time is sparse and because of the mystery of the monster being hinted at. The monster is genuinely terrifying on the first viewing because you just don't know what it is or what its deal is or how it works. And even at the end of the series you still don't really know because it's killed by 11 using her powers to essentially make it cease to exist. The imposing government entity that has been terrorizing the characters for most of the season and practically summoned the thing doesn't know a damn thing about it. Even the official name, the Demogorgon, is a name given to it by one of the characters because they're interested in D&D, and the Demogorgon is like a scary monster. In an internet age where there are wikis dedicated to every little character in every TV show and every movie and franchise who shows up for more than 20 seconds, it's almost comical how little information is actually known about the main monster of the season, even with the benefit of later seasons. This, I think, is part of the huge appeal for Stranger Things. The lack of real tangible explanations for supernatural elements, which is terrifying and makes for great theory fodder. It's a contrast to many other popular horror franchises that over-explain the monster to a point where the scare factor is usually lost and often contradicted. I'm not naming any names, but a great example is Friday the 13th. Even if the atmosphere and the horror mystery elements were the only good things about the show would still be notable, but there's so much more. Season 1 of Stranger Things has some of the most consistent, easily spread, and excellent characterization I've ever seen in a TV show. Every character that's given focus has a purpose in the story except Mike's dad, and all the main cast who are given focus are given the right amount of focus that they need to be interesting. The only one who doesn't fit as well is Steve, and that's because he was originally just a bit part asshole. But Joe Keery was so likable that the Duffers rewrote Steve to have a better arc, and honestly I can live with that. Stan Steve Harrington. But it's not just Joe Keery. Every single member of the main cast does an excellent job acting their part, including the child acting, which is weird. I'm the same age as these kids in real life, so I was their age when the show was being made, and I couldn't do stuff like this. Among the whole cast though, the standout performances are easily Millie Bobby Brown and Winona Ryder. in my opinion. Ryder has been in Hollywood for a long time, but even then this is a standout performance. It takes a certain level of talent to portray a parent who is scared and crying and talking in a high-pitched voice for a lot of this runtime of the show and not make it annoying. And she pulls off that balance perfectly. And of course, Millie Bobby Brown is, or I guess was now, one of the greatest child actors in film history. So her performance was of course phenomenal. She made the other child actors look bad and they were abnormally good. I could honestly just keep going on, but so much has been said about season 1 over the last 6 years. God, that hurts to say, that it's really hard to say anything new about what's been done well about this season. If you're going to watch any of Stranger Things, at least watch the first season. It's well worth it. While season 1 is undoubtedly the best season of Stranger Things, season 2 is probably my favorite. It is not without its issues, which I'll get to in a moment, but this season has some really high highs. The first season, despite all its greats, suffers from a slight lack of identity, a problem which is present in the first season of most shows. Season 2 really solidifies what was great about the identity of the first season, and has some of the greatest moments in the entire series because of it. Like I said though, it's not without its problems, so we should probably talk about those. Among the things that I noticed while rewatching this season was that the horror element doesn't work nearly as well as it does in the first season. It still has its moments for sure, but a lot of the mystique is lost because the audience already knows about Hawkins' lab and the Upside Down, and so it doesn't help the show to pretend that it doesn't. Speaking of the lab, because of Eleven's mass execution at the end of the first season, the people of the lab are less of an all-knowing, scary government presence, and more like an incompetent government institution which barely knows what's going on this side of the room, let alone in another dimension. Which takes away from the fear factor, but you know, props for real-world accuracy. Another thing that I found was that in favor of introducing some new characters and fleshing out some previously flat ones, some of the previous characters are done a disservice or practically cut out altogether. The most obvious offender here is Mike, whose character arc in this season is basically just being sad about 11 and being a pill to everyone else because of it. It's not completely one note, but it's not given enough time for it to work as nearly as well as it could have. It's a similar problem to Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. In that book, Harry was acting like a prick because of personal issues and emotional trauma, but it doesn't make him any less of a prick. And Micah doesn't have the benefit of an internal monologue or a considerable amount of screen time, so it's actually worse. It's also worth noting that the parents of the kids are particularly shafted in this season. The party is spending literal days away from home, and they just cut back to Mike's mom giving less thought to it than she does to thirsting over an 18-year-old. This show is weird sometimes. And of course, it wouldn't be a complete critique of season 2 if we didn't mention episode 7. This episode is pretty widely regarded as the worst episode of the entire show. Which, you know, is a pretty decent track record since this episode is just kind of okay. As for positives, it does present some interesting lore additions to this show. Namely, the fact that there were other human test subjects with powers like Eleven's. It also gives us part of Eleven's character development, you know, just like figuring out her morals and such. But other than that, it is kinda stinky. It's pretty obvious that this episode was meant to be a backdoor pilot for a show about these characters, which is unfortunate because none of them are particularly likable. It's a complete tone shift from the rest of the show, taking more inspiration from 70s and 80s crime thrillers than it does the rural horror vibe that the show has been going for thus far. It's almost completely disconnected from the plot of the rest of the season, really only connecting through Eleven's arc, and is literally in the middle of like a huge moment in the show. Like the last episode cuts at that moment and the next episode starts at that moment. Honestly, it could just be completely removed and it would be a huge improvement to the pacing of this season. It would even make it so that season 2 would keep with the theme of having only 8 episodes that the other seasons kept. So yeah, not a fan of that episode. And the last and biggest crime that this season commits is that they kill a cat in it, which is, you know, of course, unforgivable and punishable by the Geneva Convention. I will be speaking with my lawyers, justice for Muse. But besides those few admittedly glaring flaws, season 2 is excellent. The increase in budget is very immediately apparent, and while the story retreads some old ground, it does so in a ways that allow the writers to be creative and still up the suspense from the previous season. The new cast is all excellent. Sadie Sink as Max perfectly meshes into the group dynamic. Dacre Montgomery as Billy is perfectly hateable, and of course Sean Astin's Bob is too pure for this world. Literally, he dies pretty brutally. in loving memory. And some of the old cast are massively improved from their previous incarnations. Will Byers, while being the inciting incident of the last season's plot, wasn't actually in it all that much. Which is a shame, because as this season is keenly aware of, Noah Schnapp is also a pretty great actor. And of course, it wouldn't be time to praise Stranger Things characters without talking about Steve Harrington. As it turns out, he actually has much better chemistry with the younger members of the cast, especially Dustin. Character chemistry, don't make it weird. There's a reason that a lot of the fandom makes quote-unquote mom edits of him. And of course, the rest of the old cast, barring the exceptions we talked about earlier, is still incredible in their respective roles. The writers have definitely figured out what all of these characters are about. For now. While I do think the horror itself is less effective in this season, I do think that the changes made to the horror element are praiseworthy. They managed to make the big bad of this season less of a force of nature monster like they did in the previous season, and more of a cold, calculating villain. Still a monster, but a more intelligent one. On more surface level notes, the CGI and effects have improved significantly because of the budget. The general atmosphere is more Halloween-y, and it revels in that, literally taking place like right after Halloween. The cinematography is noticeably better, and of course, the score, as always, is phenomenal. Despite some large missteps, it's clear that the show found its stride in this season, and it creates a wonderful experience because of that. Season 2 of Stranger Things is great. Now, Season 3. If I lived in one of those bizarre TikTok dystopias, which are for some reason really popular, where by some logic or genetic disorder or magic spell, people have a limited amount of words that they can say, otherwise they'll face some kind of consequence, I would have to be very picky with my words. If there's one word that I would use to describe Stranger Things Season 3, if I lived in that world and there was one word that I would use to describe Stranger Things Season 3 to someone before I ran out of words and died, I guess, that one word would be bonkers. Because yes, obviously it's going to be weird. The show is called Stranger Things, but this season is on a whole other level from the other two. In the first season, we got a pretty dark, both literally and narratively, tone, and one that is fairly consistent. There's some lighthearted moments, a single scary monster, and the most outlandish thing is the local government presence that used a girl with superpowers to open up a portal to another dimension. A bit out there, but overall pretty consistent with itself. Season 2 ups the ante a little bit. One cast member gets the ability to see into the upside down, and we're introduced to another superpowered character, like our resident powerhouse. The new monster is smarter, bigger, and can control creatures that it infects. And it spreads into our world through the hole to our world that has been open for a year. You know, it makes sense. They left the hole open for a year. They expected nothing to come through. So overall, raising things up a little bit, but understandably for a second season. Then in the third season, we have a new summer mall's new setting and complete chef and aesthetic. Evil Russians, mind-controlled rats that then explode and move on their own. Mormons, teenage relationship drama, ice cream, and of course, mind-controlled people that explode and then come together to make a f***ing people mech for the Mind Flayer. There is so much going on in the season and it's all so goddamn bizarre and I love it. Don't get me wrong, this season is nowhere near as consistently good as the other two seasons, but it's just so incredibly bizarre that it's still entertaining. And just because it's not as good as the other two doesn't mean it's bad. By general TV standards, this season is still pretty decent even at its lowest points. But so much of it is just so jarringly out of sync with itself and the previous seasons that it's a marvel to behold. But enough meaningless hyperbole, we should actually probably talk about the stuff in the show. Starting off on the less intense side of things, I think we should look at the character work in this season because frankly it's one of the most glaringly inconsistent things about the season. On one hand, we have some excellent new characters, love you Robin, and great development of previous ones. Steve, Eleven, and Will in particular get some really great development when they're focused on. And Lord knows how they managed to develop Billy enough from a borderline murderous sociopath in season 2 for me to cry like a baby at his death in this season, when he honestly didn't really do anything as a character for the majority of this season. 95% of his screen time he's being controlled by the Mind Flayer. Really well done there for some reason. But as seems to be the growing problem, as the cast expands, a lot of the focus is being taken off of the main characters. Everyone has moments, but honestly, just tell me, did Lucas really have any kind of real character arc in this season? Name one thing that he actually learned, besides how great New Coke is. It's not just him either. Max, Jonathan, and even to a certain extent Nancy have little to no development. But that's definitely not the worst of it. We need to talk about the elephant in the room, Jim Hopper. I don't know what happened with Hopper, but he seems like a completely different person in this season. In the previous season, he was this stoic, very in control person who was broken emotionally, but decided to suffer silently and help other people rather than work on himself. Then he starts to heal by having Eleven in his life. He has an outburst at her, which is completely unjustified, but it comes from a fear of losing her. And then he cools down and is distracted from resolving the conflict by the rest of the season because of the plot going on over here. In this season, one of the very first things that Hopper does is bully Mike out of seeing Elle, causing emotional distress and unnecessary conflict for his adopted daughter, just so that his own limited understanding of Elle isn't threatened. And that's the theme with him in this season. Instead of being emotionally unavailable, he acts like an emotionally stunted man-child. He feels entitled to Joyce, to Eleven, and generally is just much less of a pleasant character to watch. They managed to save it for the most part in the final episode, but my god does it come close to just straight up character assassination. A lot of his character is saved by the ending where he dies. There's this whole big emotional moment, the last 10 minutes are spent practically mourning him, and it's all very sad. And then the very first trailer for season 4 revealed that he was still alive. Now to be fair, rewatching this season, the ending is still very effective. Because even if Hopper is still alive, the rest of the characters don't know that, and their reaction is what makes it heartbreaking. Elle no longer has the only positive father figure in her life. Joyce's first time romantically opening up since Bob died bites her back. And this is the final nail in the coffin of the decision for the Byers family, plus 11, to move out of Hawkins. The effects on the characters are still real, so the emotional impact is still real, even if the death isn't. Hopefully they don't mess this up in the next season. It's also worth noting that the tone in this season is really weird. It's not just a shift from the previous seasons, it's also usually really contradictory. The show is really trying to evoke the same feels as like a 80s teen summer flick while still being the most horrific and gross it's ever been. You'll have montages of Eleven and Max shopping at the mall in the same episode as two people melting together to make one giant flesh monster. That's a real thing that happens, by the way. And now there's evil Russians. What is happening? There's still a lot of really good stuff, but a lot of that stuff was already there in the previous seasons. I don't dislike this season by any means, but there's just this general drop in quality and departure from what the show was before. It's all very strange. Stranger Things is not a perfect show, especially in what is the latest season as of recording this, but it has managed to maintain a certain level of quality over the years and in the midst of an incredible surge in popularity, which sometimes kills shows. Not to sound too much like a hipster. The first 2 seasons are definitely a huge recommend. The 3rd season is probably more optional, to be honest, and it really depends on your taste for incredibly bizarre television. Hopefully the 4th season is good, and more importantly, a good definite ending. Because if any show deserves a satisfying and well done ending, it's this show. And I am not okay with this, but we're not getting that one, are we? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it and, watch my other videos and maybe even subscribe if you're feeling so inclined. It's honestly the best thing you can do to support the channel and support my work. Now, the next one that's coming out is going to be a little bit different from my normal fare, so, keep an eye out for that. Feel free to check out my socials. They're all linked down below. They're there. They're like the first few links in the description. Excuse me. Remember to take care of yourself, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Sorry, Scotty. Isn't she beautiful?